Okay, in the last few classes, we have seen how to do conceptual data modeling, and in particular, we have taken a look at how to represent a conceptual data model as an entity relationship diagram. And in beginning with this tutorial, we will see how to use a piece of software, namely Microsoft Visio 2016, to represent these entity relationship diagrams. So we have an ER diagram in front of us here, and just to remind ourselves of the basic components of this diagram, because that's what we will be representing using the software. So one major component of an entity relationship data model or an ER diagram is the entity itself. So here is an entity, here is another entity, and you know that entities have names, entities have identifiers, and entities have attributes. So we will see how to represent those using Visio. The other major component of an ER data model or an ER diagram is the relationship itself. These are the lines that connect the boxes. And a major characteristic or property of those lines is the relationships is the cardinalities. You can see these symbols at the two ends of each of the lines, and you know that there are different kinds of relationships. There's one-to-many, one-to-one, many-to-many. We will see how to represent those. There's minimum cardinality, there is maximum cardinality. So if you just recall some of those concepts, those are the concepts that we will have to keep in mind as we work our way through Microsoft Visio 2016. Okay, so let's get started with the software itself. So when you start up Visio, this is what it will look like. And Visio actually is a software tool that's used to draw many different kinds of diagrams, not just conceptual data models. So the first thing you need to do is, out of all these different options, you have to fish out the one that is used to represent conceptual data models. And this is where you find yourself. If you remember the notation, coming back to that picture that we had just seen, the notation for the relationships, in particular the notation that you see at the end of those lines for the cardinalities, that's called the crow's foot notation. So coming to Visio, what you have to do is pick out the option which says crow's foot database notation and just click on that. So that gets us started, and we will use US units. Not that it matters for this particular tutorial, but it might for other applications. So I'm picking US units. If you are doing it in Europe, or if you needed to use metric units in coming up with or drawing your ER diagram, you would choose that. But we stay with US units and hit create, and this is the screen that presents itself before you. Now, just to point out some major components of the screen, the top of the screen is very much like the options that you see in Microsoft Word or Excel. So you have a menu bar on top. So you can see I'm highlighting the menu bar. There's insert, draw, design, data, process, review, view. So there are a bunch of choices in the menu bar. And if you click any of the choices on the menu bar, it will come up with other options as well. Now, coming back to the home button, the menu choice, you have this toolbar just below it. And the toolbar, all it does is it represents operations that are used very frequently. So it puts them in the toolbar, so you don't have to go hunting for it in the menu bar itself. So the tool is very much like what you have in Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. Okay, so here you have this sheet in front of you on which you will draw the entity relationship diagram. And if you notice, it's 8.5 by 11 inches. Okay, so it's 0, here's 8.5, and here's 0, and here is 0 on the left hand bottom corner, and if you go all the way up, it's 11. Okay, so it's an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and it's as if it's one page, one blank sheet, and on which you draw diagram. Of course, if your diagram gets big, you can add as you cross the sheet and go on to the right hand side, or you go below the bottom, it will keep adding sheets for you. Okay, now what I find helpful, of course, this is too small for us to be useful for drawing purposes. You just zoom in, just like you do in a Word document. zoom in appropriately to whatever level makes you comfortable. Okay. All right, so let's get started. Remember I just said a minute ago that the two major components of an entity relationship data model are, one is the entity, the other is the relationship. So all these operators that you would need to draw the diagram, they're on this left hand side over here. So I'm pointing out where it says crow's foot database notation. Okay, so let me pick up the operator which says entity, and you see it says drag onto the page. So I just drag this entity onto the blank page, and this is the box. And going back to our picture, remember entities are represented as boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the entity called customer. Okay, so the name of, so here's, I click on name, and if I want to change it, all I do is I double click, okay, on that name, and I change it to customer. So there I have the name of the entity. Again, going back to our picture, I have just typed in the name of the entity, customer. Okay, so now I'm going to put in the attributes here. Now notice that one of the attributes is kind of special. That's customer number. That's what we call an identifier, or which would later on become your primary key in a relationship. Okay, so you have customer number, customer name, customer type. Okay, all right. So you see it says PK over here, primary key, which is your identifier for the entity relationship diagram. So again, I click on this one, and actually I can just start typing. I could CUSTNO, customer number. Okay, so there you have your primary key. I put in the primary key. Now the other two attributes were, let me see what they were, customer name and customer type. So let me put those in. So all I do is I click on the attribute name itself, and you can see this gray box surrounds it, which tells you that you're about to change that particular attribute name. So again, what was it? Customer name. Okay, so CUST customer name, just typed in. So I've got my second attribute, and I click on the third attribute, customer type. Okay, so I have my three attributes now, and do you see that as I'm working with these attributes, okay, the entity itself is surrounded by a green box. Okay, and if I want to resize the box, I just click on anywhere inside the box, and this little circle, you see this resize button, not button, the circle on the right hand side. I picked it up, and I can make it skinnier if I want to save space. Okay, too much. There I go. So okay, so there I have the three attributes. Now just suppose you decide, well, maybe I should have another attribute, the customer's email address. Okay, so here is an example of a situation where you want to add an attribute. So there are two ways to do it. One is, let's say I want to put the customer email address just below the customer name. So then what I would do is I would click on customer name, just that attribute itself, and then I right click. As soon as I right click, do you see a menu choice shows up, and one of them says insert attribute before, insert attribute after. This is very similar to what you do in Excel, where you insert a row above or below another row. Okay, so if I want to insert email address below customer name, I will just say insert attribute after, and here I will say CUST email. Okay, so there's my customer email. I've just put in a new attribute. All right. Now again, if I change my mind and I say, well, I don't really want customer email, let me take it out, I just highlight it, hit delete, and out goes the attribute. So very good. So I hope you see how one goes about creating an attribute. So you drag the rather how you create an entity. So you drag the entity operator over to the sheet, and then start typing in the attributes, give the entity a name, and so forth. Okay, now let me, again going back to our original diagram, let me create this other entity called meter, because then I can show you relationships. All right. So let's see, coming back to Visio here. Okay, so I drag another entity and I drop it here. So the name of this entity, I just clicked on entity name. I can double click on it too, but so here's meter. That's the name of the entity. So just check. Yep, that's the name of the entity. The three other attributes are meter number, which is the primary key or the identifier, meter size, and meter model. So let's put in those attributes. So the primary key is meter number. I believe that was the name of the attribute. Yep, meter number. And the second one was MTR, meter size. And I believe the third was meter model. That's over here, meter model. Okay. So I click on the third attribute and I just type over it MTR BEL, meter model. Okay. So once again, you know, this box is a little too wide. I don't know why I want to save space. So I click on the anywhere inside the box and I get all these handles around the box. There's one handle which has a yellow marker on it. That's the resize handle. So I just click on it and I pull in a little bit more. Okay. So I think I've got the two sized right. So you've seen now how to create entities. Okay. And in the process of creating entities, I showed you how to add attributes, how to delete attributes, and how to resize your entity box itself. Okay, so we've gone through one of the major components of an ER diagram, namely how to set up entities. Now notice that there's one type of entity that I haven't shown you, and that's a weak entity, something like rate. You can see it has special shapes on the corners, and I hope you remember what a weak entity is. We will look at weak entities later on in a subsequent video. For now, most of the entities that you will be working with are strong entities or sort of regular entities. Those are the ones that we have drawn. Now, let's see how long I've been recording. So it's 12 minutes. I think I should stop this recording now and continue with this on in a next video. So in the next video, I will continue from here and show you how to represent relationships. So all you have seen in this video is how to get Visio started and how to represent entities.